Welcome. If you're watching the recording, check the description for a timestamp of when we will actually get started, which will be approximately in 3 or 4 minutes from now. I'm going to hang out here and let some folks join us live. Sita, welcome. Dawn, good morning. Hannah, good morning. Blossom, good morning or good evening. Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome. Hey, Lori. Welcome back. Chantel, good afternoon. Hello, Jennifer. Silvana, good morning. Check, check, check. Audio sound fantastic? I'm assuming so. Read it, do. Oh, I gotta do the do not disturb setting on my phone. Okay. All right, we're going to start in a couple minutes officially. Oh. It's awesome to hear, Lori. Good morning, Linda. All right, ready? Let's do it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Holding Space for Love to Be Seen podcast. I almost forgot the name of the show. We are back. We weren't here last week. I was out traveling in Sweden. But we are back on schedule with our weekly live broadcast. And I'm excited to get back into it. If this is your first time, welcome. We're going to hang out here for about an hour, and I'm going to dive into this wonderful topic today, which is to create yourself rather than trying to find yourself. And the format is as such. We'll wrap up this little introduction. Then we're going to do 2 minutes of stillness, just allowing ourselves to be here, a bit of a meditative space. And then from that stillness, I'll start running my mouth about the topic, sharing some insights, wisdom, and spontaneous reflections. And then after I do that, if there's any questions lingering around in the live participation, you can type those in the comment section and I can speak to those. And then we'll wrap this thing up with a super short and sweet guided meditation. That sounds fantastic. So let's just dive into this, and we will start with the 2 minutes of stillness. All right. Well. So I'm really excited about this topic because it touches on a lot of great points that I feel can invite us into a renewed sense of freedom and also maybe point a direction outside of the some of the suffering that we might be experiencing. But the title of this episode, Don't Find Yourself, Create Yourself. And the inspiration for this episode comes from a beautiful conversation I had with a friend of mine who was just struggling big time. And she had communicated this in a way where she said, it seems like I'm always trying to find myself. And I can't find it. Sometimes I think I do, but then it slips through my fingers, or I seem to lose it. And so I'm always on this sort of quest to get to some version of myself in the future where I can finally feel like, okay, I found myself. And I find this really interesting because from a spiritual context, there's a fundamental question that we ask as human beings. And that question is, who am I? And we can really notice how this question fuels a lot of the seeking. It fuels as the motivation of why we do what we do, because we're trying to answer this question: who am I? And I just invite us to feel into the reality of this, that in some way or another, we're trying to get a grasp on this something that we call me. And it's interesting too, because there's a twist in this that I feel puts an end to that seeking, to where we're no longer operating in a way that's trying to answer that question. And the twist is essentially that the self you're looking to find isn't there and never will be there. And so you can stop looking for it. And it gives you a new, or at least an opportunity for a new way of living, one that's much more present and available rather than constantly trying to get to the future. And what do I mean by this? That the self we're looking for isn't really there. Well, here's the dilemma. The dilemma is that we are looking for a self in the mind that is predominantly a narrative. We're looking to find a story about ourselves that's real. And the natural challenge there is that no story is real. Because if I ask, who am I? The mind immediately goes into story mode. It goes into labels. It paints a picture. And we're trying to paint a picture that's real, something that we can know that's solid. In a very direct way, what I invite you to see is that no matter what picture you create, that picture will never be real because it's a picture. And see that this is what the mind does. It paints pictures. And those pictures are not reality. So if you're looking for something real about yourself, then connecting with the reality of what you are isn't going to be found in the mind's images. The mind can never tell you something that's true and real about you. All it can do is tell stories, which at best can only point you in a particular direction of looking. In the same way that I could say that who I am is Tiger, but yet my name doesn't say anything about the reality of what I am. And in fact, the only reason there is that name is so that we can communicate and play with each other. In fact, that's the whole function of names and labels, is so that we can communicate with each other and navigate. It's quite practical to have names so that if there's 3 or more people and I want to talk to you, I can use your name. But yet the name doesn't tell me anything that's real about you. It's a pointer. Likewise, stories are the same thing. Pictures are the same thing. If I take a picture of you, which in a way is kind of like telling a story, that picture might point towards the reality of what you are, but the picture is so far removed from the reality of what you are. And in some ways, you could take a picture of yourself and be like, oh, I found myself. See, look, I'm right here. But after a while, you'll start to realize how disconnected that picture is from the reality of what you are. And it'll just dramatically lose its importance. But yes, there is this fundamental craving that wants to answer this question: who am I? And so it's wise to understand that the answer to this isn't going to be found in the mind. This, of course, is the invitation of spirituality. The invitation of spirituality is to see something that's real and true, to connect with something that's real and true. Spirituality is an invitation to look behind the mind's content and to see what's there. And we can just play with this for a second. Like, put it this way. If I were to ask you, what is life? Do you see that anything you say about it, it's not that? Right? Anything I say about life is to paint a picture of life. It's to tell a story. But yet all of that is so far removed from the reality of life. So much as so is that the story I tell is a product of imagination. We can even say the picture is a product of imagination. And imagination isn't alive. It's not real. It's imaginary. And so to ask the question, what is life? To really discover what life is, invites a profound stillness, a silence. It invites you to experience the reality of it. And as you do, you'll also recognize that there's nothing that you can say about it that even begins to capture what it is. It's like you recognize that I can't answer this question by thinking about it. To connect with the realness of life requires me to shut up. It requires me to shut up and then find myself melting into the reality of life. And this is also where human beings find a great difficulty, because they are predominantly living their life in the mind. They think that the mind's content is real. They think that it's true. And so they're constantly swimming around in the mind's noise, thinking that they can answer the question. But this is something that spirituality invites you to see, is that the answer isn't in the mind. The answer to what is real and true cannot be found with that particular instrument. We must access a certain different instrument in what we are that is much more heart-based and present-based, that allows you to sink into the reality of it all. And so as we understand this, we recognize that finding ourselves is predominantly a quest that takes place through thinking. And just look at this in the most adorable way of how much we are thinking about ourselves. Thinking about ourselves, thinking that we're really thinking about ourselves, but really we're just thinking about our own thinking. It's not actually the real self that you're thinking about. You're thinking about your ideas about yourself. And again, that's all perfectly fine and playful. But if you think that the mind is commenting on the reality of what you are, it's very easy to get lost in the mind's content. Because then you start trying to cling to some ideas, push away other ideas, feel threatened by some ideas. But there's such a profound liberation to realize that the mind cannot touch what you really are. So in exploring that, to see that I can't find the self in the mind, and it invites a stillness, just like in discovering the realness of life. It invites this stillness to feel into the reality of what you are. And granted, I'm using words to point to these things. So we got to be somewhat a little bit cautious and not believe what I'm saying, but see if you can be pointed in the direction of what I'm saying. You see, there's something infinitely more real than anything you could think about. And maybe we can just do that little exercise right now. Like, for example, in my experience, I can faintly hear the sound of birds singing outside. And if I think about the birds singing, I'm not really experiencing the birds singing. I'm not experiencing the reality of it. In order for me to experience the reality, I have to surrender thinking, and I have to just be so incredibly present with the bird song. It's like everything else disappears. All the thoughts, all the stories. And then in what I discover in the reality of the bird song, I can't say anything about it, but I know it. I know that there's nothing to say about it, but yet I know it. I'm there with it. And so let's switch this a little bit with the question of who am I? Because the who is looking for a narrative, right? The who is a story. And maybe we can approach this question by saying, what am I? And this is fascinating to me as well, because what am I is that invitation into presence. And what I don't find there is a name. I don't find a particular gender. I don't find a story. What I find is an aliveness that is, let's just say, empty. Can you feel into that with me just for a second? Like, ask the question, what am I really? And in that question, can you also see what you're not? It's interesting because everything that you think you are just starts to like float away. Because again, the question is, what am I really? And really implies real. And whatever is real right now, because right now is real. And so if there's anything that comes that isn't right now, it's not real. It's just story. The past is a story. The future is a story. It's all mental content. And again, the mind is not touching what's real. It's imagining. And so there's very much this imagination of you, which isn't really you. And then there's the reality of what you are. And maybe you see also that as you drop into that inquiry, there's really nothing the mind can say about it. Because anything the mind says, it's not that. And what's also quite interesting too is as you drop into this space, what you are begins to become more and more expansive. Right? In one regard, at the beginning, with your eyes open and your mind on, you think that you're contained within the boundary of the skin, right? Like, oh, what I am ends at the end of my skin. But yet, when you close your eyes and you feel into it, what you are maybe is more akin to the awakeness of awareness having an experience. And you notice that this self that you've been looking for is a self that's made up of thinking. It's like you want to find the perfect story. But yet, in stillness, in reality, all of that disappears. And so, even if you did potentially find the perfect story, in stillness, it would just disappear. It's not really there. So, it's not really what you are. You might convince yourself it's what you are, but it's just a story. And this also speaks to the nature of suffering, because all suffering in some context is the loss of identity. We find our identity through the attachment to story, and then the story changes, and then we think we lost who we are. Like, and you see this all the time, like in relationships, where you get in a relationship and it's like, oh, I found myself. And then the relationship changes, and then it's like, oh, I lost myself. And that very much can feel like a death if you're identified with that story. But yet again, through all that play of identification, there's nothing actually happening to you, right? The realness of you, there's nothing actually happening to you. The awareness is caught up in some sort of narrative, and you believe that's who you are. And if that narrative collapses, then it feels like that self dies in some way. But yet, even in that death, there's nothing actually happening to you. In the same way, like I've said, if you identify with a car and you think, oh, this is my car, it says something about me, then if something happens to that car, you think it happens to you. But yet, nothing's happening to you. And so this takes us on a bit of a journey to get in touch with something that's more real. And in the reality of this space, you recognize that the self we've been looking for in the mind, in the imagination, isn't there. And if it even appears to be there, it just appears to be there. It's like we buy into the story. And so, what's really there? In the what am I really space? And again, anything I say about it, it's not that. But I am going to say something about it as a way of pointing beyond the words. So using words, what is there is a vast emptiness. We could also say there's nothing there. There's this vast space of emptiness that allows for the rising and the falling of experience. Whether it's the experience of a bird song, the experience of cars passing by, the experience of particular temperatures, the experience of physical sensation. And all of these things come and go. And if it's something that comes and goes, then clearly that's not you. That's important to see. If it comes and goes, then clearly that's not you. What you really are is before what comes and goes. And so here we are with this emptiness. And in this emptiness is an awakeness, an awareness. And yes, the mind might fight for attention. The mind might fight for space in this awareness. But even that comes and goes. And this can be scary for some people because in one regard, it can destroy everything that you think you are because you see that I'm not really that. It also kind of shows you I don't know who I am. And naturally, there's this challenge in communicating these things because I have to use words. And the reality of it is untouched by the words. So let me just playfully speak to the opportunity that I see in this vast emptiness. And that opportunity is akin to a blank canvas. I might have to talk about this with my eyes closed. So here's the situation. Here's what I know, right? Like if I look outside of what I think I know, what I think I want, yada, 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 and I ask what's unquestionably true about this I amness, what I see is an awareness that's awake. I see an emptiness, which we'll call a blank canvas. I see the rising and falling of experience. I see the mind interpreting those experiences. This is a big one. I see that as things come and go, as things rise and fall, I see that the mind can interpret those things. And that interpretation is like a creation. It creates something out of those things coming and going, right? If there's a thought, then there's a thought about the thought. If there's a car passing by, there's thoughts about the car passing by. And the thinking about those things turns them into something, turns them into experience. and I see the infinite possibility for interpretation. I see the infinite possibility of where I could put my attention on what experience, on what thing coming and going. And I see that as I put my attention on it and as I give it an interpretation, as I tell a story about it, it changes my relational experience with it. It's like my thought turns things into form. And I see that there's this conscious participation where this happens automatically, but the more conscious I am of it, then the more I get to consciously participate in the process. And so it's very obvious that there's sort of two modes of operation. There's an unconscious participation and there's a conscious participation. One is to not know that I'm creating, and the other is to know that I'm creating. In my creation is happening upon this blank canvas. It's almost like saying everything that arises and falls, everything that comes and goes doesn't mean anything. But yet I can give it meaning. And the meaning is my creation. And what I experience is my creation, my meaning. And again, importantly, this happens within a infinite landscape, meaning that one thing that appears to be happening could have a million different interpretations of meaning. And no matter what meaning I project onto it, it doesn't really mean that. You know what this tells me? Is that the creation of meaning is playful. It can be whatever. And also, I see that the propensity to create meaning, we can say even the compulsion to create meaning, most often is a projected conditioning. What have I been conditioned to see this as meaning? What was I told this means? Right? These are the unconscious projections. And I can see those unconscious projections happen automatically, but then I can question those projections. And as I question them, I can see that they don't really mean that. And if I can see that they don't really mean that, I can ask, what do they really mean? And I can see that they don't mean anything. And if I can see that they don't mean anything, but yet something in me wants to give meaning, then what is the meaning I can give it consciously? God, that's so powerful. In the same way that maybe there's a nervousness and there can be a conditioned projection of meaning, and I can see that meaning, and I can see that it doesn't really mean that. What else might it mean? And this frees me to give playful meaning. The unconscious projection of meaning assumes that the meaning is outside of my creation of meaning. I'll say that again. The unconscious projection of meaning assumes that the meaning I'm seeing is a meaning outside of my creation of the meaning. But as I examine it, I see that the meaning only exists through my creation of that meaning. It's not really out there, which is also to say I'm not a victim of it. I'm the creator of it. And then to see that, I see that it doesn't really mean that. And even just seeing that it doesn't really mean that shows me it's not as serious as I'm making it out to be. I'm seeing that it's playful. I'm seeing that even if I give it a new meaning, it's still not that, which makes it playful and frees me from being a prisoner to the meaning. And also what happens here, as you release this attachment to meaning, you don't even necessarily have to create a new meaning, even though you can. What you'll find is that as you release the seriousness, there'll be a more playful meaning that arises. That's the conscious part. It's almost to say that our misunderstanding of meaning is what creates serious meaning. And as we see there's really no meaning, it exposes a freedom to create meaning that's much more playful in nature. So, what does this have to do with not finding yourself and create yourself? Well, let me just speak from my experience here. What I see is that there isn't a real self for me to go and find, because that self is just a projection of meaning. So there's in the search for self, there's nowhere to go. Because everywhere I go, that's just a new projection. It's not really what I am. And that brings me back to this emptiness of what I am. And in the emptiness of what I am is the blank canvas with a playful opportunity to create. Again, I find myself in this vast emptiness, apparently having what looks like a human experience that has all sorts of adorable confusions and misunderstandings and projections, conditioned patterns of thinking. And I see that those unconscious happenings are also what creates the difficulty. And so what I see is an invitation to consciously participate in the creation process. I see that the self I'm experiencing is a self that's been created, and in most instances, unconsciously. Also, mostly because there wasn't the awareness that I'm creating it all. And as I see this more clearly, I see the opportunity to create consciously. And being that it's all empty, it's a blank canvas, the question arises, okay, if I can create consciously, what kind of self would I like to experience? Because I see the self that I don't want to experience is a product of conditioned projection. I didn't know that I was participating in that. I thought it came from the outside. Like I thought I was made this way rather than I unconsciously made myself this way because I didn't realize the power that was there. And so in this emptiness, I see an invitation, much like staring at a blank canvas, asking, what do I want to paint? What do I want to paint? And again, not in an effort to find myself, but for the sake of play. It's almost like saying, what kind of adventure do I want to go on? And the answer to this is relatively simple because it's a matter of sincerity. It's a matter of resonance. What resonates? And you see, when you're trying to find yourself, you're not asking, what would I enjoy creating? You're asking, what should I create? Right? Like, what should I, as if I can find myself in the future or I can be approved of? Same thing. No, all of that's just noise. Here I am. I'm in emptiness. I'm always going to be in emptiness. I'm always going to be faced with this blank canvas. And so if the emptiness is always there and this blank canvas remains, what do I want to paint? What do I want to create for the sake of experiencing a creation? And again, it's simply like asking, what would I enjoy? What's the challenge that I want to go on? What areas of painful unconscious projections would I like to bring some more conscious participation to? And you see, that's an adventure. It's not solving something so that I can be more worthy. It's not solving something so that I can be approved of. It's curiosity. It's like, oh, I'm much more conscious than I thought I was. There's much more power here than I thought there was. Okay. What would I like to create? And again, the more deeply sincere this is, the better it's going to go. And in some ways, this has been communicated as, what are you passionate about? What's your genuine interest? What are you here to do? And this is simply asking what's sincere, what's alive within you, right? Like in the same way that when an artist looks at a blank canvas, they're looking for a sincerity within that wants to come out, right? And that sincerity within that wants to come out, that's the creation. It wants to create. And so you don't have to pick up a paintbrush per se, but you pick up your own consciousness and you direct your attention in the direction of something that's worthwhile and beautiful. What would I like to focus on? In the same way of painting a picture, it's the same sort of transformational process for the human being. Because that transformation is simply painting a new picture. And there's so many things unseen here where it could be said that the universe is 100% in support of this conscious participation. And so as you connect with this deeper sincerity of what would like to be created, you're also inviting a tremendous amount of support from life. And it's always fascinating to see that as you make these sorts of heart-based decisions, how life can come in and support the process. Yeah, that's fascinating. Wow, I didn't talk about much of anything that I thought I was going to talk about, but that's how it went. Maybe you'll find some fun in that. But a few more minutes of hanging out here before we do the guided meditation. So, is there anybody hanging out with us live that wants to ask a question or have me speak to something in particular? And I can do that before we do the meditation, even though that whole session was kind of like a meditation. Lori asks, doesn't this also speak to what's happening in the world? All story? Absolutely. 100%. And that's also a leap for a lot of people. And I invite us to see that everything you think that's happening in the world isn't really happening. What you think is happening is the story that you're telling about what's happening. It's the narrative. It's what you think things mean. And in the same way, let's put it this way. If you look at a forest, there's 10,000 things happening, some that you can give a meaning of violence to, some that you can give a meaning of unfair to. You can give 10,000 different meanings, but those meanings are in you. In the forest, those meanings don't exist. Again, using words to point, what's happening in the forest is whatever needs to happen in the forest for the forest to be the forest. And so what's really happening in the forest is being a forest. And that's what it needs to be doing in order for it to be what it is. And those 10,000 pieces in the forest are not really pieces. It's all the forest. It's the whole thing. And so whether it's the world or the universe or whatever, it's just all one thing happening that allows for this moment to be this moment, right? There's this great cosmic balance, just like in the forest. When lightning sets the trees on fire, that's part of the forest being the forest. Now, your conditioning might not like it. Your conditioning might think it means this or it means that. It should, it shouldn't, da 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 da. But all of that doesn't really matter. The forest is going to do what the forest does so that the forest can be the forest. Life knows what needs to happen in order for that balance to be maintained. And whatever I think about it, life really doesn't care what I think about it. I'm free to think about whatever I think about. But again, just because I give certain things meaning in the forest doesn't mean that's really what it means. And the more I think it means something, the more I'll get lost in my own meaning. The more I won't see that I'm the creator of meaning. I'll assume that I'm a victim of meaning. Like there's a meaning out here that's imposing itself on me. And that's just not the case. Another question, is there more ways to paint than being in action? Yeah, absolutely. Imagination is paint, right? Your imagination is the paint strokes. Your interpretation of meaning is painting. Even your interpretation of action is painting. And so and again, it might be wise to recognize that action is a product of conscious painting, meaning that there's something more fundamental that happens before action. And then there's also the question of where does action come from, right? The same action can come from lack as it can come from abundance. And where it comes from, which is also like saying the meaning, is going to contribute more to the experienced outcome than the action itself. That's really important to see. It shows us that the action isn't clearly as important as we think it is if our intentions and meanings are way out of whack, which is why it's important to have somewhat of a fundamental understanding of what comes before action, or else you're just going to stress yourself out being busy, which is probably quite common. All right. Whoops. Lisa, the answer to that question is yes. Okay. We are going to move on to the guided meditation. Let's do that. Welcome to this space. This is going to be a short opportunity for us to check in with the present moment and recognize that we are not here to find anything. Maybe more accurately, we're here to explore. We're here to paint. We're here to create. Let's settle into this moment. Let's take 3 deep breaths and just invite ourselves into presence. We can acknowledge the adorable difficulty in seeking, and seeking. Looking to find something, looking to hold on to something, and even looking to avoid something. This fundamental assumption that there's somewhere to get to other than right now. Can we be open to the possibility that life is about this moment? That the prize is already here? All we have to do is look at our past experience in everything we chased after, we find ourselves right back here in the vast emptiness of this moment. Maybe we have completely exhausted ourselves trying to hold on to something that's not ours to hold on to. But I just invite us into this moment and maybe see that even though you weren't able to capture this, that, or the other, still, right now, here you are. And beyond all the mind stories, beyond all the ideas, assumptions, and beliefs, what you are is whole and complete. It's only a thought of something missing. And beyond that idea, here you are, as you've always been. There's the fundamental misunderstanding that assumes you're in this life to get something. Can you also see that this assumption says you're missing something? And I wonder if you can see just how untrue that is, that it's just another thought. The only thing that's missing is an idea about something missing. And we get captured by these ideas. But yet, right now, right here in the immediacy of this moment, what you are is alive. There is a breath that's given. And the reality of what you are is extraordinarily supported by all of life. In this space is a wellness. In this space is a life that holds you in the totality of what you are. This life even holds space for you to have whatever dream you dream, to think, believe, imagine, whatever it is you think, believe, or imagine. It's all allowed. It's all held. You're so free that you are free enough to imagine yourself as not being free. You're free. You're free to see yourself as less than. You're free to see yourself as missing something. You're free to paint whatever picture you paint. This space is a blank canvas. Can you step outside the narrative of who you think you are and drop more deeply into the reality of what you are? Most notably, seeing that you are not all of these stories. You are not these ideas. And everything the mind is thinking, it's not really happening. Let's take a moment and breathe into that space. Let's take 3 deep breaths. Just breathe. You see, my friend, understandably and compassionately, we get lost in our own dream. We get lost in what we think is happening, what we think we're missing, and that's fine. But there is an opportunity to see that none of that's actually happening. There's an opportunity to see how empty this landscape really is. It's almost like seeing that there's nothing to get, there's nothing to acquire. We could even go so far as saying there's nothing for you to fix. Comically, it can be said that the only thing that's wrong with you is that you think there's something wrong with you. And when you think there's something wrong with you, playfully again, you start acting in wrong ways. Let's recognize the innocence in all of this. Let's come home to the emptiness. Maybe we can just start over. Maybe we can start painting a new picture. Maybe we can recognize that we're not here to get something because we're not missing anything, but rather we are here to discover something beautiful on the inside of what we are. And then we can share that beauty with the world. We recognize that we are here to share something, which implies you have an abundance of it. For me, this is profoundly more true. I'm not missing anything. I just wasn't seeing myself clearly, and that's fine, as it presents an opportunity to enjoy the miracle of seeing myself more clearly which helps me to see other people more clearly and see life more clearly. All right. Go play. Thanks for meditating with me today. All right, lovelies. Thank you for hanging out with me. I will be back next week. Wonderful to see you guys enjoyed that meditation. That was a good one. Thanks for the donations, for supporting this work. It helps me do what I do. And I'll be back next week. If you have any topics in mind, shoot me a message. Let me know. And we'll see if we can incorporate that into the show. Alrighty. Till next time. Cheers.